Hey, what's up guys? So as you know, the new Abyss just came out. A few days ago, floors 9 through 12 changed. We got the new 2.0 Abyss filled with a ton of new Inazuma enemies that are very challenging and that have a ton of HP. And so this is the hardest Abyss yet. Like there are some numbers on screen now showing for floor 12 in particular how tanky the enemies are and how much of a DPS check this can be. But in this video, I'm going to be giving you guys some very important tips to clear this efficiently and to make your life a lot easier, especially by giving you guys tips on specific enemies and how to group them, like places you can stand to make the floors a lot easier and stuff like that. So we're going to be covering every single floor that changed, 9, 10, 11, and 12 in this guide in as much detail as possible without taking too much time. A lot of time and effort has gone into this video to make sure that I cover everything, so I'm very confident that this guide will help you full clear the new Abyss. So with that being said, I'm excited to get into it. Before we begin, I want you guys to know that I stream most nights on Twitch, link in the description if you're interested. Shout out to my math guys at Jeff77 for helping me with this video. Be sure to sub if you're new and let's get into it. The first thing I want to do is talk about why this Abyss is a bit harder than the other ones and how to play around that. The reason for that is because the DPS check, especially on floors like floor 12, are just higher, meaning you usually need better team comps or better artifacts to make up for the very high HP enemies. Basically, all the samurais here are extremely tanky, the Mirror Maiden, and all these enemies like the Maguu Kenki, and even the Ruin Guards, Ruin Hunters, Ruin Defenders are all very tanky, having hundreds of thousands of HP, some enemies having up to 500 to 600,000. Because of that, if you want to be able to clear within that 420 second mark, you're going to need to know a lot of the advice I'm giving in this video in order to just maximize your damage and basically rush them down as fast as possible. With that being said, one of the biggest things you have to keep in mind for this whole Abyss is the blessing of the Abyssal Moon. This changes every 2 weeks, so if you're watching this in 2 weeks, the buff might be different, but this is something you really have to utilize, and especially this one in particular, I hear a lot of people undervaluing it or at least not using it efficiently. What this does is reduce the defense of opponents whenever you normal charge or plunge attack them if you do have full elemental energy. That means that when your burst is ready, or at least you have enough energy to cast your burst, your attacks will decrease the defense of opponents by 7% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. And it's something you should utilize even if your character, your main DPS, is burst dependent. So to show you guys what I mean, let's say you're using Shao and you want to reduce their defense, but your burst basically has to be ready, right? What you can do is you can do a couple of auto attacks before using your burst, then just proc your burst, and the enemy's defense will basically be reduced because you did those auto attacks when your energy was full. Lastly, before we get into every specific floor, I thought I should mention that before recording this video, I did do a full clear of 9, 10, 11, and 12 using only 4-star characters. And so it is doable, and I will, especially for floor 12, give you guys some tips on good team comps that you can use which feature 4-star characters. And while that will be mainly in the floor 12 section, since it is the hardest floor, they do apply to other floors as well. And for more example teams, I highly suggest you watch some of my previous team videos, which feature many 4-star and 5-star teams. Now what I want to do is get into every specific floor to help you guys with each of them individually so that you can get all 9 stars on every floor. For floor 9, first of all, let's just talk about the Leyline Disorder. There's effectively a plasma field that damages you every 5 seconds, but the damage it deals honestly isn't that high. You can usually out heal it, it just sort of forces you to play around it and basically not play in that field too long except to just kill enemies. Regarding the specific enemies, first of all, I would highly suggest you bring your grouper on the second half, especially for chamber 2, because there's a lot of treasure hoarders. So if you have an Anemo character like Sucrose, Venti, or even the main character that can efficiently group enemies, it can save you a lot of time. Regarding the specific elements you want, on the first half, you want stuff to break the Fatui shields. So I would suggest Pyro for the Cryo Gunner, Cryo for the Electro Hammer, and a Claymore for the Geochanter. And my biggest tip for this floor is to rush the Hydro Gunner down as fast as possible. The reason for that is because his shield is extremely slow to clear. If you can't clear it fast enough, if you can't kill him in like one burst window, you should bring the Electro element to clear that shield. However, even with Electro, it takes a while to clear, so I just highly suggest you focus him down as fast as possible so that you don't have to deal with his shield, and also he heals his allies, so yeah, you just want to take care of him as fast as possible. For 9-1, you usually want to be attacking those archers, the range hilichurls, because the slimes will run to you and group up, whereas the archers will just stand still and shoot. So if you want to be able to hit everything at once, you should attack those guys, and then the slimes will just bounce to you so you can kill them easier. Also for chamber 3, against the Pyro agents and the Sison mages, having an Anemo character to clump them up, like Sucrose, Venti, or the Traveler, can be very nice to group up both Sison mages or both Pyro agents very efficiently. Now moving on to floor 10, the Leyline Disorder is pretty simple. There is one leader among the opponents, and then there's just a bunch of attendants that will buff that leader. In fact, every attendant that's alive will increase the leader's elemental and physical resistance and will also heal them. So what you're going to want to do is eliminate the attendants, the little dudes, before you focus the leader to remove the buffs, and then you can just focus that last single target. In case you're wondering who the leader is, it's pretty obvious. It's basically the first enemy on the list, and it's usually the big one. Like, it's usually one big enemy and then a few small ones. And in Chamber 2, it is the Pyro Agent or the Electro Siphon Mage. For the first half of floor 10-1, the multiple Samatrils can be very annoying because there's Dendro, Hydro, and Anemo ones all messing you up. The Dendro ones are the most dangerous, but Anemo and Hydro can be annoying. So I would recommend you just go around killing the Samatrils one by one, and then you kill the Abyss Mage, who's the leader, after that. Something you should notice is that sometimes, especially like 10-1, there are many enemies everywhere, and they're basically very difficult to group up. So while it can feel annoying to have to run like through all of them one by one, it is what you should be doing. Just focus on killing one at a time, keep running around and just killing them all. It does feel like you're somewhat wasting time, but trust me, as long as you kill them fast enough, you should have more than enough time to still get the 9 stars. In terms of the elements you'd need on each team, as you guys can see, there are some Fatui, so you want the corresponding element to break their shields. So on the first half, you want Pyro for the Cryo Gunner, and on the second half, you want Hydro, Cryo, and Claymore, something to break the Geochanter's shield. And do keep in mind that, as I mentioned in floor 9, you do want to rush this Hydro Gunner down as fast as possible, ideally before he gets his shield. And if you can't do that fast enough, then I would recommend bringing Electro to clear the shield. You also need in your team comp something to destroy the Lector and the Herald's shields. I talked about this in previous videos, but in case you're unaware, to break the Abyss Lector's shields, you either want Pyro or Cryo, and something that works exceptionally well is Thundering Fury Bennett. And in case you don't know why Thundering Fury Bennett works, just very quickly, it basically makes your elemental skill spammable on a 1-second cooldown. Every time you overload, the cooldown will be decreased, and your elemental skill already has an insanely low cooldown inside of your burst because of Bennett's 2 passive talents. But you can also just use other Pyro characters or even Cryo. For the Abyss Herald, however, on the second half, I highly recommend having a Cryo unit in your team, especially Chongyun, who can apply Cryo very fast and take out the shield with ease. Spamming Chongyun's E on cooldown and then swapping to a polearm or sword user to attack and apply Cryo very fast is all you need to clear the Herald's shield, and it really shouldn't take you much time at all. So overall for floor 10, it's pretty straightforward. You just need good team comps, so good enough elements to clear all the shields and stuff, and then you just want to be focusing the attendants first and then the leaders, and you should be fine as long as your characters have enough investment, like pretty good artifacts and high talent levels. Now we get to talk about floor 11. Floor 11 is a floor that a lot of people have been struggling on, especially because of the third chamber having a Cryo and a Pyro Hypostasis, and especially the Pyro one can take quite a while to beat, especially if you don't know what you're doing. So we're going to cover all of that right now. Other than those enemies though, this floor is pretty straightforward. Your Pyro and your Cryo damage are buffed by 60%, which is absolutely huge, and so you should definitely use this ley line to your advantage in how you build your teams. Even the free Pyro and Cryo characters are amazing, right? Characters like Ling and Kaya can be 2 very strong carries for this floor if you don't have any others. So while there are definitely very strong 4-star options for Cryo and Pyro users, there's also a bunch of 5 stars. So basically everyone is equipped to have a carry that can work in floor 11. With that being said, what should your teams look like? Well, as you guys can see, throughout all the floors, there's a pretty consistent theme of needing Pyro for the first half and Cryo for the second half. Most of the enemies on the first half will need a Pyro character to clear efficiently, whereas for the second half, you would want to bring Cryo to deal with all of these shields. And for the Abyss Lector, while things like Thundering Fury Bennett can still work very well, you can also just use Cryo on this half to break the Lector's shields, or even something like Sucrose swirling the Pyro from the Abyss Mage can work as well. On top of that, you also want Hydro on the second half to break the Pyro Hypostasis' shield, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. So overall, team building in floor 11 is pretty easy. You want to bring your Pyro characters on the first half, and on the second half, ideally a Cryo carry. A freeze team can work well. Anything that just has Cryo would be great. And you also want a Hydro applier for the Pyro Hypostasis. Most Hydro characters work. Auto attackers like Barbara or Mona can work. Child can work very well as well because you can press his E and just rush down the Pyro shield, and he works very well for clearing that. And also a character like Xingqiu can work, but basically only if you have your burst ready, so do keep that in mind. Now for some more specific tips on how to deal with the enemies in floor 11, the first chamber, as you guys can see, is pretty straightforward. The first half just has a ton of enemies, which ideally you'd want to group up and deal AoE damage against, and the second half has this giant lava turtle that you should focus, and then the Electro Abyss Mage will teleport to you, and so you can clear them both at the same time. For the second half, it's pretty straightforward. We already talked about these enemies previously, so I'm not going to repeat myself, but as long as you have the corresponding elements to break all of their shields. It's basically just a DPS check where you should focus on their shields and then rush them down as fast as possible. Also, I did want to mention that for floor 11-2 on the first half, you'll see there are 2 mages. You can group them up pretty easily by making them teleport, but what you do need to keep in mind is that they both have this aura under them. The cryo one will summon a prison under you. You can look out for it, and when you see it, you can dash away, or it'll trap you and deal a lot of damage. And the hydro one will do that sort of like surf effect or whatever that applies a hydro debuff to your characters. And if you use an ability when that hits you, so I'll wait for it to hit me, there you go, my cooldown will be very long. So I highly recommend you use your cooldowns before that happens, or you wait it out. The third chamber, however, gets more complicated, and this is where I can actually offer some advice and some very important tips to get you guys to clear efficiently. For the Pyro Hypostasis, if you guys don't know how the enemy works, basically he'll just use some moves and then he'll go down and you'll be able to attack him like a normal Hypostasis. That should be pretty easy, and do keep in mind that since he is cryo, you can constantly melt on him with a pyro character, so I highly recommend using someone like Xiangling, Hu Tao, Yanfei, any pyro character you have to rush this Cryo Hypostasis down as fast as possible. For the Cryo Hypostasis, you will notice that there's a phase where you have to charge attack these sort of cubes to send them towards him and break his cryo shield. Something you can do is stay next to the Cryo Hypostasis because he launches the cubes to basically where you are or whatever distance you're at. So the closer you are to him, the closer the cubes will be to him. And this is a mechanic that isn't too well known, and so it's definitely something you should abuse. Stay next to him when he gets low HP so that when he shoots those cubes out, you can knock them back to him. In order to knock the cubes back, obviously you want to charge attack them. And while there are many different charge attacks that work, something you can do is actually sort of quick scope them with a bow, where you do a charge shot that you don't really charge for long. You know, you just like tap the charge button, shoot it, and it does count as a charge attack. For the Pyro Hypostasis, this is definitely the hardest enemy and the one that'll take you the longest to clear. Because of that, you want to be pretty optimal with your rotations and how fast you can break its pyro shield. As I mentioned earlier, Child can clear it very fast if you have him, but Barbara also works very well and can also be your healer, saving you a slot. If you're using Barbara, something you can do is press your E on her and stand next to the Hypostasis, trying not to die obviously, because her E will apply hydro passively to the Pyro Hypostasis. And you can also spam your normal attack, but do be sure to weave in some charge attacks between your normals because the cooldown of your hydro application is actually different on your normals and your charge attacks. So to apply hydro as fast as possible, you want to be mixing in charge attacks between your normals. There is one phase that you guys are going to see on screen where you have to extinguish these little pyro things. As you can see, I just used Barbara, and Barbara works wonders here because she's a ranged character who can just attack them from far away and proc that vaporize reaction. You want to basically proc a reaction on them, so having a character who's using like a catalyst or even like Xingqiu's rain swords that can attack them from far away helps a lot and allows you to break them within seconds, because if you don't, the Pyro Hypostasis will actually gain his pyro shield back and it will delay the fight, making it a lot harder to get your stars. But apart from those specific phases, it's basically just a DPS check, so the only other real advice I can give you is to just abuse this ley line disorder and use powerful cryo units for the Pyro Hypostasis. So with all that out of the way, let's now talk about floor 12, the most difficult one and the one that has gotten a lot of people talking, and the floor that I want to spend the most time on, going in as much detail as possible. First of all, for the ley line disorder, I love this one. There are two 10-second cycles of high tide and low tide. If you play efficiently, and it's honestly pretty easy to learn the timings, you really don't need a lot of energy recharge at all, because during high tide, you get an insane amount of elemental particles, getting up to 10 elemental energy every 2.8 seconds, and then during low tide, you'll gain no energy at all from any sources. While this might seem annoying, and it can be, it's pretty easy to play around if you think ahead. What you can do is you can basically use all your bursts during low tide, just start everything up, and then as soon as it's high tide, you can use all your elemental skills, auto attack on characters, and just restore your energy very fast, even without a lot of energy recharge. And the last thing I wanted to mention regarding the ley line is that it is, you do start every chamber on high tide. So as you can see, the particles will be generated at the very start. You actually can get a lot of energy during high tide, but do keep in mind that you start in high tide, and then after that it'll be the 10-second cycles of low tide to high tide again. With that out of the way, let's talk about every chamber and the enemies inside them, how to build your team and how to play around these enemies, and just some general tips to help you get 9 stars. First of all, I want to say 12-1 is usually the hardest chamber. This is because all the enemies here have an insane amount of HP and they can be very annoying to deal with. Also, a very annoying part about floor 12-1 is the electro aura that applies to all the enemies, making them very resistant to damage, and so you should definitely remove that as soon as possible by spamming some reactions like overload or basically any electro reaction to get the aura off of them as soon as possible so that you can start dealing more damage again. For 12-1 first half, which is actually once again, you know, the hardest chamber, something you can do is charge attack this guy over here and then run all the way to this pillar, stand here, and they will group up to you. After that, as long as you stand near the wall when you're fighting them, they'll constantly keep dashing towards the wall. And as you can see, they're all very nicely grouped up. So I can just, use Shao, constantly punch them, or whichever character you're using can do some nice AoE, because they will constantly group up here as long as you stay next to this wall. Do keep in mind though that when you're doing this, the charge attack on this guy is pretty important, because if you don't, he'll do a different attack. Instead of dashing to you, he'll start like shooting you, which means it'll take longer for them to group up. They will still group up, but if you want them to group instantly, I recommend staggering him with the charge attack like I showed you guys. For the next two samurai, something you can do is actually go up top here to like this pillar around here, and they should be able, yeah, there you go. They dash to you. You might take damage if you don't dash, but a shield works too. And then as long as you stay around the wall, they will stay grouped, generally speaking. Also, something to keep in mind, for the two big samurais in the second wave, they have a unique mechanic where one of them will heal up when the other one dies. So basically, you should try to kill them both at the same time or within a very small delay to avoid one of them healing back up. For the second half, it can also be quite annoying, but basically it starts with two Pyro agents that you want to kill as fast as possible, and then there's a Mirror Maiden and a Siphon Mage. For the Pyro agents, you can group them up instantly, which means as soon as the half starts, you should use your Sucrose ult, your Anemo MC ult, or your Venti ult, one of your bursts that can group them up before they start spinning, going invisible, and teleporting everywhere. If you do that, you can actually skip a long part of their like animation and just kill them very fast. Once they're defeated, the Mirror Maiden will spawn, and she can be very annoying. Basically, you want to do as much burst damage to her as possible at the start, but there are also many strategies you can do to make this fight a lot less annoying. If you guys don't know, the Mirror Maiden will try to mark you as soon as possible. Once she marks you, she becomes immune to staggering and displacement, which means you can no longer like move her with Sucrose or Venti's burst. You can do that, however, before she gets marked. So as you guys can see, once the Mirror Maiden spawns, you can use abilities that would displace her. You can use Venti ult, Sucrose, whatever. You can chain CC her and prevent her from even ever marking you. But she does have an ability where she marks you, and I'll show you guys what that looks like. And once she does that, you can no longer displace or stagger her. As you can see, I just got marked. There's this little X around my character. And now if I use Venti Burst, you'll see that it won't actually lift her in the air. She's not getting displaced because I got marked. So while getting marked is normal, you can avoid it by constantly stunning her or displacing her. But something you can do is even while you are marked, as I am right now, you can still freeze her, which is why I believe freeze comps are so good in 12.1. As you can see, she's getting permafrozen, so she's very easy to hit and kill. A few things to keep in mind. For floor 12, since a lot of the floors have very different types of enemies, I highly recommend running different team comps for every chamber if you don't have 3 stars in all of them. What I mean by that is, let's say for second half of 12.2, you want someone who's really good single target, but for 12.3, there's a lot of enemies. For 12.1, there's also a lot of enemies. Running a single target DPS can be very smart for the Maguu Kenki, but can maybe hold you back in the other chambers. Another example of this is a freeze comp being absolutely amazing for 12.1 second half. Great for the Mirror Maidens, great against the Pyro agents and the Siphon. For 12.2, you actually can't freeze the Maguu Kenki, so I don't recommend using a freeze comp for 12.2. So this floor is really weird because some teams are amazing for certain chambers, but terrible in others. So because of that, I highly recommend, if you're just trying to get 3 stars on one specific chamber, to use a team that's good for that one. Very good 4-star teams. My 2 personal favorite that I used for the entirety of floor 12 were a reverse melt quick swap team, where I'm just spamming my bursts on every character, abusing the high tide to constantly get an insane amount of particles. And my second half had a taser comp, basically a Beto team, but where Sucrose was actually auto attacking, constantly proccing Swirl and applying the Verdescent Veneer set to enemies. I have videos on both of these teams, by the way, if you need more information, but these are the 4-star comps I use to full 9-star clear every single chamber, and they are amazing here. For floor 12 too, I recommend you try to get the Abyss Mage to teleport you while you attack the Lava Churl. Clear its shield using Electro ideally, and then just focus down the Lava Churl. He has very predictable attacks and isn't too hard to deal with. On the second half, however, you have the Maguu Kenki, which can cause a lot of problems for a lot of players. That being said, keep in mind that all of his attacks are very predictable. There's a very long wind-up animation, and while the timing to dodge it can be somewhat strict, if you don't feel confident in dodging it, or if you haven't learned the timing, you can use an elemental burst, which usually has a lot of invulnerability attached to it, a lot of iframes, and you can just use that burst while he's doing an attack and dodge it very efficiently. Usually what I do to deal with a Maguu Kenki is either dash as he's going to attack, use an elemental burst, or even use a shield like Zhongli or Diona, which can usually just tank the damage if you are building HP on that shield user. While I personally cleared this chamber using Beto and Shangling, someone who can deal a lot of damage to a single target can be favored here, since AoE isn't needed at all. Do keep in mind that the Maguu Kenki can take a while to learn and to get used to the timings, but I highly recommend just going out and fighting the Maguu Kenki in Inazuma if you need to practice, because you'll notice that a lot of his animations are very predictable. Like he'll start like drawing a circle around him before doing an attack, and you can usually just get ready for it, dash through it, or use a burst, or even just shield yourself. For the third and final chamber, there's a few tips I can give you guys, and there is a way to group up all of these little rune guys very efficiently. First of all, the first half will start with a Rune Hunter, which you have to eliminate, single target one enemy as fast as possible, and the second half will have a Rune Guard. If you don't know, when the Rune Hunter flies up in the air, you can shoot its eye to drop it down, and keep in mind that if you're using a character who plunges, who jumps in the air like Shao or Kazuha, as soon as you do your first plunge, he will jump in the air. And so if you do a plunge attack or something, I highly recommend you swap to your bow character if you're running one, to shoot it in the eye, and if you're not running a bow character, I would not recommend jumping in the air and plunging. After you defeat the Rune Hunter, there'll be 3 little rune guys that spawn. For the first half, you want to run to the right side. When you're attacking this right enemy, they will all group up to you. The other 2 rune guys will come towards you. And so they'll all be grouped up and neatly packed so that you can just destroy them all with your AoE damage. On the second half, after you defeat the Rune Guard, this time you want to go to the left. So first half you go right, second half you go left, and then while you're fighting the leftmost enemy, the other 2 should come towards you and basically, once again, group up so that you can clear them very fast. Do keep in mind that when you're building a team, you don't really need specific elements. There is a Hydro Abyss Mage whose shield can be annoying if you don't have the correct elements, but other than that, you really don't need anything specific to clear all of this. And quickswap teams work really well for floor 12 because you can use all your bursts during low tide, and then during high tide, you can basically get all your particles back by spamming your skill on every character and swapping through them. And there are many really good quickswap teams, even with just 4-star characters, but also, obviously some with 5 stars as well. And something to keep in mind is that you are invulnerable during the animation of your burst, which means a quickswap team can dodge some attacks very easily, like against the samurais or the Maguu Kenki. Spamming your burst on cooldown will allow you to dodge a lot of attacks that would otherwise require a more precise timing with a dash. And so overall, while this abyss is the hardest, right, because there are some difficulty spikes that weren't really there before, the enemies in floor 12 just have more HP than they used to, it is still very doable if you have good enough artifacts, good enough team comps, and you know what you're doing, which is what I tried to help you guys with in this guide. I tried to give you guys as much advice as possible to make every floor doable and to help you guys get the 36 star that you're looking for, 9 stars on every single floor. And obviously, if you do need help with those or builds or anything, I do have a guide for most characters on my channel, and you can also stop by my stream and ask me for some advice. With that being said, I hope I helped. I hope I included everything you were looking for in this guide. I really tried to add as much information as possible to help everyone with every single floor, especially 12. If there's anything I want to add in the future, it will be in a pinned comment because, the abyss is complicated, so there might be some things I overlooked or just want to add for some bonus info. With that being said, I don't want to make this video too long, so I really hope you enjoyed it. It took a lot of time and effort to make, so if you enjoyed it, feel free to leave a like and sub if you're new. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.